the highlight on Olympic Peninsula Community Clinic. We want to get a little update on the changes and developments there. And I had asked Scott Brandon as the executive director. He's been, I think, in his position over a year now. And he actually wanted us to change things up a little bit. And he offered up our two speakers this morning. The first one is Amy Miller. And she was here in about a year or two ago when she was out visiting the homeless on a very frozen, cold, windy night. And she is the Rediscovery Program Director. She's going to share that with us. And Viola Ware, the lead case manager, to speak exactly what's going on with the clinics. Amy is one of the 3 clinic directors, and she'll be able to answer any questions beyond Rediscovery in tandem, and she will introduce Viola Ware. So the Amy Miller was the 2018 Port Angeles Citizen of the Year. She's highly motivated, self-directed, with a master's in social work with a broad range of social work experience. She has led the Rediscovery Program since its inception in 2017, having come to the program with over 15 years experience in clinical work, where she provided emotional and practical transformative individual and group therapy for the seriously and persistently mentally ill and chemically addicted, whether in crisis or incarcerated. Amy has 3 years of experience in clinical supervision for 30+ licensed clinicians with caseloads of hundreds of adults and children. She is accomplished in government policy and procedure implementation and transition. She has worked productively alongside law enforcement in several capacities, both in correctional settings and on patrol. She has demonstrated an ability to connect during community outreach, and recently has been featured on front page of local papers, quoted by national organizations and partnerships throughout the states. We're honored to have both Amy and Viola here today to bring us up to speed on what's going on at OPCC, which used to be VMO, so the Olympic Peninsula Community Clinic. I'll turn it over to you, Amy.
Well, that was a wonderful introduction. I feel like somebody's pulled that right out of my LinkedIn.
That's your friend, Scott.
Well, that's the least you could do for volunteering us to come, right?
That's right. That's what I told them.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Good morning, guys. I love talking about Rediscovery and what Rediscovery does. So that's really the focus of my agenda today. And obviously I want to leave some questions or some time for questions, because that's always the funnest part of presentations like this, is to answer the questions that you guys have rolling around. So I'll do a brief kind of overview in that OPCC has been the gap clinic in the community. And what that means is there are certain gaps within the service provider family, and folks often fall through those cracks. And so what's really great about OPCC is that we're able to look for ways to care for those folks that just, for whatever the reason, aren't able to find that success elsewhere. And so we do things very differently at the clinic. We very often go to where the need is. And so the clinic is doing med clinics out at the local shelters. They do med clinics at the local health department and needle exchange program. And so we also do a lot of partnering with the case managers, and Viola will talk about a little bit more about the hiking and going out into the community, where we are able to take our medical provider as well as our psych consultant out into the woods via tablets and Zoom, so that we can provide some treatment and start that engagement process and work on getting folks to come inside. Very often the vulnerable people that we work with are struggling with both behavioral health issues, both mental illness and substance use, and have been really marginalized and have been let down by providers in the past. And so trust is a real issue. And so by us being able to meet them where they are at physically, we really start to, our biggest job then is to really just let them know that we will do the things that we say we're going to do. We are going to care for them, and we can come to them until they're ready to come to us. And I believe us to be the only agency that does that, especially with medical and psych providers. A lot of the agencies will, take folks in and make appointments and expect them to show up at a certain time, participate in a certain way. And a lot of the folks that we will work with and that we really enjoy working with are folks that aren't able to make that kind of connection right away. So recently we've been able to expand some of our behavioral health services because that's where the need has been. I don't know if you guys have been having presentations or keeping up to date on the behavioral health response to this pandemic that we're in, and the increasing numbers of folks that are reaching psychiatric crisis. And the Healthcare Authority and the CDC have done a lot of projections, and they really anticipate an increase in the need for psychiatric services, and that we should suspect or expect the increase of suicidality. And those issues are sort of triple fold for the folks that are out there unhoused and living in the community outdoors. So we have our work cut out for us, but we love it. And I have a wonderful team, which we were able to expand back in July because we were able to secure another WASPIC grant, which is the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. And so the reason that we're able to get those grants is because we partner up with law enforcement quite a bit. And we do a lot of our work with them. And our new program is Arrest and Jail Alternatives. And so the goal is to find folks that are having some significant contacts with law enforcement, not because of criminal behavior necessarily, but because of their circumstance. So when you're living unhoused, you are often trespassing. You are often, being called, about in stores, maybe behaving bizarrely, or, just sort of being the nuisance crime. And so we're able to work with folks that are getting those kind of, we call them social law enforcement contacts. We get those calls, and instead of sending the police force out, we're able to go with the police, or sometimes on our own, to meet with folks that really the issue is needing to get into behavioral health services. And so we're able to help link those folks with services in the moment and on the long end too. We now have case management services where we can take on folks that will need that kind of support until they can find their success in other more traditional service agencies. I hope that all made sense. I'm not used to being up so early, guys. And so I know I invited Viola to share. She's been a real valuable partner in this program. She really laid the groundwork for the ability for this program to exist. And so I can't possibly do a presentation about what we do without her. And I just recently stole her away. So I'm super glad to have her. And she's been a part of law enforcement partnerships and getting out there and getting services out to the people who are out there with law enforcement and on foot and in camps and in woods. And so I wanted to have her talk a little bit about that and how it all got started and where it's at now. Specifically, with our expansion, we've been able to get the case managers tablets. And so we're able to do some medical consults and some psychiatric consults right out there in the wilderness. And so that's really kind of a cool and unique out of the box way to provide services. And I'm thrilled that we're able to do that. So she'll talk a little bit about that. And I know we did have Officer Van Duzen also set up to attend, but the last I just heard from him was that he had to run to a call. So he may or may not join us, but he has been the assigned PAPD officer, the outreach officer. And what that means is he has extra work. He is still a patrol officer, and that will always take priority. So he still needs to respond to calls and do the documentation that's related to that. But on top of those duties, he has us. And so we ride along with him for a couple of hours each day, and we can respond to calls and provide some value there also. And when we aren't responding to calls, we are going out and looking for work. So we really could not do the work that we do without our partnership with law enforcement. And so we're working on expanding that to SQUIM in the county as well. So Viola, if you're awake, I'd like to have you guys listen to Viola. She will talk about the beginnings of this and how she really laid the groundwork for something more expanded to exist, and talk a little bit about how that outreach works in the world now with the pandemic and our technology.
Okay. Good morning. First, I come from a background in corrections. So I started in community corrections when I was about 20 years old, and just out of curiosity. And I got hired by calling the hiring manager once a day for 2 weeks until he just gave up and gave me a job. And I learned a great deal by just talking to people and observing. And one of the biggest takeaways for me was if you wanted somebody to behave like a criminal, you treated them like a criminal. And if you wanted somebody to behave like a human being, you treated them like a human being. And that is something that I've carried with me ever since. And especially in working with people who are sheltering outside. And for a period of time when I lived in Seattle, I followed a group of people who lived outside around the Ballard Locks area. And there were people who had worked on fishing boats, and they knew the Deadliest Catch crew. So they were part of that group of people, and they had been injured off the boats and were unable to get back on the boats. And the lives that they lived, it was subject to an enormous amount of violence just from being on the street. And the violence that they experienced was not only from each other, it was from people who were part of normative society who didn't believe that they should be there. And then the messages that they had received that were internalized. And so, but I worked for Serenity House so my coordination with law enforcement was through Serenity House when I was working there and managing coordinated entry, which is kind of the entry point for all homeless services. So anybody needing homeless services would come in through coordinated entry and then be assessed and determined, oh, you need shelter, oh, you just need some help with moving costs, things like that. And what I learned most from there is that with my work with Serenity House, I did that for about 7 years, is that the main predictor of long-term housing instability is trauma symptom severity and low self-esteem. So one of the pieces of when we would do an intake with somebody is we would ask them, what are your greatest strengths? 99.9999% of the time, the response we would get is, I don't know. These are folks that have been so beaten down, and the shame is so big and has been so internalized, either through stigma or through trauma in their lives, that just even the consideration of something bigger and better, or they have been so worn down by what's gone on, or the systems that they have been in contact with are hostile and have told them so many times, what you're doing is wrong. You were wrong, right? These are all the mistakes that you've made. You need to be fixed. You are broken. You're a broken person. Or everything that they've done, or they've been trespassed so many times, or they, everything that they've come in contact with has told them that they are broken or a broken person. That is the narrative that they're living. And so to go to someone and to treat them with dignity and with some, for me, when we do outreach, my favorite part of it is I'm going out there and loving on people. And that, that's the part of my job that I love. And it sounds fluffy and foofy, but that's what gets them engaged. There's somebody who's out there that is going to treat them with dignity and treat them with a human being. And that gives them more than anything material that I can hand them. And that is the hope that they gain. And that is what is going to get them to engage with us and to re-engage with the system pieces that that is going to help them the most. So that's going to be the cup of coffee that they take from me. That is going to be okay, I'll talk to you about housing. Okay, I'll talk to you about treatment. Okay, I'm going to listen to you. And this medical person that is going to come and help look at me and deal with the trench foot that I've been ignoring for however many months I've been camping down here in this gully and hiding out from everybody. And so it's the trust piece that is the biggest piece to overcome when we go out and talk to folks that are out and camping. In fact, today is my hiking day. So today I'm going to be going out with Michael, who is our operations manager over at OPCC. He is also a medical assistant. So he takes about a 60-pound pack full of medical supplies, and we're going to be going out and hiking and taking medical care to folks and seeing to their medical needs. And that is huge because that is something that they don't get when people go out. And it's something that I didn't have. So that's like the most exciting thing for me. When I started walking with the police department back, gosh, I think it was in 2016, and it was in October. I have pictures that are now showing up on my Facebook of myself and now Deputy Chief Jason Vieira. That's when we started I started walking with Sergeant Vieira. It was just us going out and talking to people and just saying hi and would you like housing services? We're just out here talking to you. And Jason had such a good rapport with folks out on the street. And I thought when we first started walking that I was going to learn a lot from Jason about the folks out there. And it turned out Jason was asking me questions. So Viola, what about this situation? So Viola, what happens when we do this? And it turned out that Jason learned a lot about the housing process and what happened with people. Like when you find somebody on the street who had been living in a tent and living out there for however many years, a lot of folks that are living in tents fit the definition of chronically homeless. So they've been out sheltering outside for at least a year or more. And to get somebody like that, even just to get them engaged in housing services, that's one thing. But to get them in front of a landlord and to get a landlord to take a look at them and go, oh, I'm going to risk my property on this individual that smells like a campfire, right? That's a lot of trust and that's a lot to ask. We can have, our county has a lot of money to set behind somebody, but to get the landlord and the community to trust in that relationship is also a lot of work. And so it's not just building that relationship between the housing agencies and the client, it's building that relationship between the housing agencies and the private landlords, and then the client and the landlords, and keeping all of that moving, and then bringing in all the services to help that individual maintain that housing. And it's a lot to build, but once those things fall into place, then those individuals aren't as apt to use a lot of emergency services at the level that they used to. The police contacts reduced. That was one thing that Jason started to see. And the police contacts become smaller and shorter and more pleasant. And that was something that they learned where they felt it was worth to build to look for this contract, which eventually became Rediscovery with Amy. So I'm sorry, that was really tangential. I've had a lot of coffee.
That was wonderful. That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Viola. And you guys now see why I'm so glad to have her. This was a serendipitous reunion. So, and Officer Van Dusen is unable to log in. So that would be what we have to share with you. However, I do want to make sure if there is time that we are here for some questions.
Sure. First off, Amy and Viola, great presentation. Very well done. What y'all are doing is amazing work. So we got about 10 minutes for questions. I'd like to lead one off this, okay? Just out of curiosity, what's your all's main goals that you'd like to accomplish over the next 12 months?
So many. Good question. So right now, we are building and trying to keep pretty secure our case management program. So in the beginning, it was a lot of outreach, like Viola has been talking about, where we could ride along or walk along with the officers and meet people and engage and let them know that there are services available. What we've been able to do since July, because of the new grant, is provide the case management so that not only were we introducing ourselves to people, but we were also able to say, and then come with me, we'll help. And so that's something that we want to grow and build so that we can help more folks move through those programs and increasing our behavioral health capacity at the clinic. What we have been finding is, again, back to what I was saying about unable to find that success in the traditional service providers. There are more and more folks that have either been, have tried and failed, for lack of a better word, at traditional providers, or haven't been able to make appointments because it's tough to do that when you're living outside, and they get discharged from programs. So we need to have at the clinic, we'd like to have more capacity for behavioral health interactions.
And for me right now, it's building more of those bridges. Right now, I have just started every other Friday, I'm doing the hiking, and then every other Friday I've just started, and I'm so excited about this. I now have somebody from Serenity House and Housing that I'm taking around and taking to people who have been disengaged or otherwise not connected with housing. So now I'm taking housing to them. So that's an exciting piece.
Another question. I mean, you all have had a lot of success, undoubtedly. Can you share like a personal success story that really has touched your heart in a personal way with an individual that you could share with us?
Pick just one?
Yeah, just one or two.
Well, Viola,
Yeah,
I suspect that you and I are thinking about the same one, at least to start with. And you certainly
I'll let you
have.
go first.
Yeah, you're right. It's very hard to pick one, but I think that for me, the way I define success may be a little bit differently than how others might define success. So I'm not, like, the end of my story is not they're housed and they're good and I don't see them again. But the end of my story is that this is an individual who literally found in a tent using IV drugs and not good physically, a lot of health issues, not good psychiatrically. Drugs take a pretty big toll on folks, and as does living outdoors. And so I feel like I really got to meet this individual at their lowest moment. And it was not easy to build a relationship, to even get somebody to tell me their full name. From there, I mean, that was probably 3 years ago. And from there, we've been able to engage multiple different times. I mean, there was some lost engagement in there. People often come in and out, but there has been maintained a connection. And even when we weren't seeing her in the community because she would hide and use drugs and do things that were related to that lifestyle, we would still be able to, I always reached out. I always asked about her. Like, we would have other people kind of reach out to her for us. And so the end of my story probably is the beginning of Viola's story, if she was thinking of the same lady, is that we had a couple of false starts, as Kelly, another team member, calls them. Couple of, we went to treatment, we came back, we had big goals, and it didn't work out that time. Right now, we're in the middle of another really good start for this young lady. And she is a young lady, she's about 35, and she's engaging in services, she's being sheltered. She's not housed, but she is being sheltered right now. And she's engaging in medical care, she's engaging in our case management services. And eventually we're hoping that she will engage in some more behavioral health services. But what's really cool, and I hope I'm not taking Viola's story, is that it's one thing at a time, and she is leading. Yep. She is leading that journey, and we we're there to bounce those ideas off with her. We're there to be like, well, what about this or what about that? But we are following her and just helping her to remove barriers to access to services, to watch her grow and shine. And I just got to spend some time with her last evening. I think she's been on Viola's caseload only a couple of months now. But I got to spend some time with her last evening, and I had to message my team and just say how grateful I am for them. I walked away with goosebumps. I mean, she is in a space mentally where she's making some lasting changes. And for me, that's not the end of her story. Viola is going to continue to work with her and work through her goals until we reach a point where we think, okay, well, you don't need that level of support. But this is it's amazing to watch these people transform. And that story that I tried to generalize and not give any individual information about could be repeated hundreds of times for us. I mean, it's a really similar timeline for our folks. We meet them outside, whether that would be at a lunch in the park, or hiking with Viola, or, walking down a trail, or seeing them at the shelter, where our team is very much present out in the community. No one has an office. So that might be something to answer your last question. Maybe we'd like to have some offices for our case managers, but I think they really enjoy being out there. And so we really, on like ground zero, get to watch people find their space, transform, follow their goals. And, eventually we do have to sort of let go of people, but we haven't been very good at that. We maintain a relationship and we check in, because once change is made, it needs to then be maintained. And as Viola was talking about, building those relationships with folks takes a lot of time and effort. And sometimes we are their people. And so we're not going to disappear on them.
Thanks a lot. I mean, Viola, we get like 2 minutes left. Do you want to just carry on the story about this individual?
Well, I'm actually going to pick a different story, and I'll try to hone it down. There is an individual that was referred to us from the jail, and they have lots of police contact. There's a lot of mental illness. There's a lot of self-medicating with various drugs. This is somebody that we've known for years. And I've done a lot of seed planting with them, and I've watched them grow to a point where in conversations that I've had with them when they've been in crisis, they've been able to tell me, because they're very volatile people, and I've had to go and sort of teach different agencies that have sheltered them how to communicate with them, because they're very particular in how you communicate with them. And it's been, they've recently said things to me like, I'm going to step away from you now because I'm not trusting anybody right now, and I need people around me who are smarter than me. Or I am saying things right now that I've never said before, and I'm thinking things right now that I've never thought before. And I've tried to plant the seed with them about, hey, you mentioned treatment a while back, let's talk about treatment, and they've not grasped it. Well, just the other day, they actually came to me and said, hey, I want to talk about treatment. I said, okay, let's make the phone call. And they went off on a tangent and they hemmed and hawed about it. And then they allowed me to make the phone call to get them an assessment. And after we hung up on that phone call, I said, hey, thank you for letting me make that phone call. And they looked at me, and this is a very intelligent person. And they looked at me and they said, well, you're easy to please. Well, the next day for their appointment, they weren't there at the shelter when treatment showed up to do their assessment. I was like, oh, they weren't there. Well, it's a false start. It happens when people gear up to go to treatment. Well, it turns out they didn't know, they forgot if treatment was going to show up. They had actually showed up to the treatment center for their assessment. So it's in building those relationships and having those conversations and planting the seeds. And like Amy said, this person is directing those goals, and that's when those goals have meaning, and that's when it's more likely that those goals are going to stick. So
Very good. Amy and Viola, thank you very much for your presentation. And Kathy, thanks for setting all that up.
Thanks for having us.
And Matt, thanks for joining us this morning and give us an update on the levy and all the great work you're doing there. And the auction is now live. So, let's put our bids in, encourage family and friends to get their bids going, and you'll see Vivian's Mexican meal separately. So, yeah. And, we're all anxious to see how the auction goes. So, Norma or Kathy, once everything closes, can we maybe send an update